It's amazing how after over 20 years, the C5 Corvette still looks and feels like a contemporary sports car. After all, this basically set the precedent that the C6 and C7 Corvettes would follow afterwards. But why am I driving this one today? Well, this is actually my friend Ibrahim's car. He picked it up as a fun summer daily driver, and he's like, Jake, you just have to try this thing and remind yourself just how good the C5 really is. And so today, I think I will. This particular C5 is an FRC, the fixed roof coupe, and in my opinion, the best looking of the bunch, because this is the same body and chassis that the Z06 is based off of. And I think in general, this body style has aged so gracefully. I mean, the proportions are all completely right. Long, low, the nose slopes down, giving you a great view over the front fenders, and this short, stubby deck. It all looks great. It's very, very tidy, even now. Though, there is an asterisk. One thing that does give away the C5's age are things like the panel gaps, which are classic 90s GM. It's particularly egregious here on the back hatch. If you follow the body line from where the hardtop goes back here to the trunk opening, it goes from tight to very wide to very, very tight. Also, fun fact about this rear hatch, while it is super duper practical, there's a lot of trunk space in here, you can fit a golf bag or whatever you got to do. It is a real pain in the butt to close this hatch unless the doors are open or the windows are down because of the pressure that builds up in the cabin. I have the windows down right now, so it should close first try. On the upside, that's a nice solid thunk. Of course, the real magic as far as most enthusiasts are concerned is under the hood here, because along with the C5 back in 1997 debuted the Ls1 Engine. 5.7 liter V8 naturally aspirated, and in this case paired to a 6-speed manual. Now initially these kicked out 345 horsepower, however because this is a later Corvette, this one produces 350 horsepower and 375 pound-feet of torque. Nothing to laugh at even today. Back then, 0 to 60 happened in 4.5 seconds, and it trapped, I believe, 110 miles an hour in the quarter, so this thing is definitely no slouch. While most parts of the C5 have aged pretty gracefully, the interior, well, a bit less so. It was never really good when it came out, and over time it has just gotten progressively more stale and dated, if I'm entirely honest. Though, mercifully, the previous owner of this car did put in 2 aftermarket bucket seats, which are much more comfortable than the stock Corvette seats, which are universally hated on for being just kind of awful. Personally, I wish they were a little bit lower, but that's kind of just on me. Otherwise, what I do like is that even back when this came out in 1997, this gave the driver all the pertinent information they would ever need to know. Because in this gauge cluster, you have your tachometer, your speedometer, your fuel gauge, and then in the digital display down here, you can toggle between things like oil pressure, oil temperature, and a real-time coolant temperature reading if you want to know the exact number down to the degree.
Man, it's funny that things like the doors require a really good shove to close because they're a little bit floppy with age. But let's see how this thing drives. Well, that's very satisfying. Now, my buddy Ibrahim bought this car lightly modified off the previous owner. He's basically owned it for a few weeks, just done a quick look over on it, make sure everything's okay and safe for me to come romping on it out here. So modifications on this C5. The seats, as you have seen, has a Borla exhaust on it, which sounds fantastic. What I don't like is it has some sort of short shifter on it, which is way too notchy and chunky, like that. It makes getting into reverse and first terrible. But otherwise, this is pretty much standard. It's on stock suspension. It has the C5 Z06 wheels, so that's a double staggered setup. 17s in the front, 18s in the back. I think it's like a 255 front tire and a 285 rear. Though, interestingly, this car's on all seasons, and again, not by my friend's choice, but the fronts are a BF Goodrich, and the rears are a Michelin Pilot Sport all-season tire. Both are fine tires by themselves, but obviously pairing different tires front to rear is a recipe for not ideal handling. So even though this car has the active handling traction management system, you have to turn it off because with the mix and match tires, it is so overly aggressive, you cannot drive this thing basically at all. car is a big deal because, like I mentioned, it pretty much became the precedent that the C6 and C7 Corvettes followed in both style and substance. That means this has a transverse leaf spring suspension, so double wishbone with a shock in it, but it has leaf springs instead of coils, which is wacky to think about, but it does work. Because Corvettes, C5, 6, and 7 tend to be very easy on their tires because of the suspension design. So while it may seem archaic, it does work. And I would say that's the thing that impresses me the most about getting in this car, because it is, 20 years old, it has over 100,000 miles on it, but it does ride beautifully. You do have this great sensation of what the tires are doing in all four corners. You can really feel the front tires loaded to the steering, and as the car rolls a bit, you can feel the rear tires getting that traction. Now, with the C5, it'll set a precedent for the drive line. So like I mentioned, the Ls1 is up front, but there's not a transmission here. It's actually a mid-mounted transaxle. They use a big torque tube right down here, and the transmission is actually behind me. So while it is a T56 transmission, it's technically an MN6 because it's not a conventional T56 like you find in a Camaro or something because of that transaxle. That said, this thing does shift quite nicely, though this short shifter, I'm not sure which brand it is awful in my opinion. Ibrahim likes it because he's big and jacked, so he can rip the gears through here, but me, I'm a mere 200 pounds. I don't have enough muscle on me to rip it through the gears, without any regard for mechanical sympathy. It's funny, the gearing in this transmission is so incredibly long. For perspective, in 6th gear at 70 miles an hour, you're only turning 1,500 revs. The gearing is so long in this transmission. That's one of the things that actually changed for the C5Z. They gave it tighter gearing and actually a different transmission unit altogether. But the gearing is very long, so it makes this thing actually feel pretty lazy because you're never really revving it that hard. Like even now, I'm barely at 4,000 revs. But that's okay because the Ls1 is so torquey. Man, I have the exhaust mic'd up because these Borla mufflers just sound fantastic on this thing, especially with the windows down. Now, of course, I can have the windows down because it'll blow out all the audio in here, but trust me, it sounds fantastic. Hopefully the audio is recording quite nicely for the video. But this, to me, feels like the perfect everyday exhaust setup. It's not too obnoxious. It doesn't drone on the freeway. It's very quiet when you're cruising. But when you get on it, it does sound great. Very meaty and very hearty. Back in the day, this was the top of the line. This was a high-performance engine. And like I said, even now, this thing is no slouch. It feels very quick. But it's just cool to see, like, what this was like back when this came out. Because, I mean, if I'm trying to imagine having a driver's license in 1997 and knowing this existed, this must have blown people's minds when it came out. It's kind of funny comparing the Ls1 to, like, a later LS3 or even now the LT series of engines. Because while this is a very torquey engine, make no doubt about it, you can drive around all day under 2,000 RPM, no problem. It is just interesting to see how far they've come along because while these are all pushrod V8s, all from the same family, they really have made these newer engines that much torqueier, which is crazy to think about. But the thing is, this is not a new car review. This is a 20-year-old enthusiast car review. And that's where the C5, in my opinion, shines even brighter. Because, sure, some aspects of this are dated, but the fundamentals, the foundation is just so good here that it makes for a great enthusiast sports car. Now, the used car market, especially here in Los Angeles, has gone a bit insane in the past few months. But Ibrahim, I'm not gonna say how much he paid. He paid an amount that I would say would get you a nice, medium mileage NC Miata. For perspective. And at first I thought thought to myself, wow, that's not cheap for a 20-year-old car. But then once you get behind the wheel of this thing, and in particular look how clean this one is, you're like, wow, that's money well spent, because this is so much car for the money. It is truly impressive how much value there is, because 20 years down the line, people found that C5s, for the most part, are incredibly reliable cars. Now, sure, the earlier cars did have some occasional electrical hiccups. You know, the body control modules and things like that are not super fun to deal with. But the powertrain and the chassis is super sorted. And so it's no surprise I'm starting to see like spec Corvette racers and Corvette time attack cars, because as a sports car, these are fantastic. This generation in particular just has such a raw feeling about it that you really don't get in newer cars. And man, this thing is just so charming to drive. And so that's where I think the C5 shines, because this really is the ultimate enthusiast value proposition. You want to kick ass daily? Boom, you got it. This thing has AC, it's really comfy, it's really quiet. What do you want it to be? You want a badass autocross car? No problem. For the longest time, these things were dominating A stock, or I guess A street, now autocross. You want a badass track toy? Well, good news, you got that too. Though I would say that one of the C5's kind of weak spots is the cooling system. If you're a hardcore track day nerd like me, you absolutely have to upgrade the cooling. Throw a couple big oil coolers at it, a big radiator. I think DeWitt's makes a good one. Or Durale, one of those guys. Anywho, update the cooling on this thing, throw some decent brake pads in it, some good brake fluid, and you will be set. Because this thing has so much tire on it in factory form. The suspension's pretty good in factory form. It has tons of power. It's not that heavy. This thing weighs under 3,200 pounds, I believe. That if you are a track day bro or a weekend warrior, this is just a fantastic base to build upon. Because of course, if you get behind the wheel and say 350 horsepower is not enough, it's an LS engine. You throw upgraded heads, a bigger cam, and long tube headers in this thing, and a good dyno tune, and you're gonna pick up a ton of power. As an all-rounder, if you are a car enthusiast, you owe it to yourself to try driving a C5 Corvette. Obviously get the stick, don't do the 4-speed automatic, don't torture yourself like that. Get the stick, try and find one that is tastefully modified like this, and just really enjoy it, because this is so satisfying that I'm actually rambling. I've had to cut this video down substantially, because I just keep hammering the gas and talking about how good it is. And if you've seen this channel, you know I've driven a lot of cars, and so I think that absolutely says something that even hopping into this car now, this to me has a lot of assets that modern cars have lost sight of, and it could do with a refresher course on. I want to thank my friend Ibrahim for throwing me the keys to this Corvette for this weekend. It's been a blast to drive this car around. It's very satisfying to drive. I see why he's so excited to have this as a fun daily. And Ibrahim, if you've made it this far in the video, let's go to a track day, because this thing is begging for it, dude. Alright guys, I think that's all I got with this one. I'm sure I've missed things. I'm kind of just going off the top of my head here, but